Devastation unleashed. Typhoon Regaza ravages South China. A monster storm strikes Guangdong. On September 24, 2025, Typhoon Regaza slammed into Yangjiang, Guangdong province with unprecedented ferocity, packing winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour, equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane. The storm unleashed chaos across the region. Coastal communities were battered by towering waves, torrential downpours, and storm surges that transformed streets into raging rivers. Videos shared online showed rooftops torn apart, cars hurled like debris, and shards of glass and metal flying through the air like shrapnel. For locals, venturing outside was unthinkable. Gale-force winds knocked pedestrians to the ground, forcing some to cling to streetlights or crawl to safety. Ancient trees, some centuries old with trunks as wide as barrels, were uprooted in moments, their roots exposed like gnarled skeletons. Even modern infrastructure buckled. Wind turbines, heralded as emblems of China's green energy ambitions, were reduced to twisted wreckage. Millions spent on those turbines, and they collapsed like paper, one resident posted on social media, fueling outrage over the government's shoddy infrastructure investments. By dawn, Yangjiang looked like a battlefield. Debris clogged major roads, storefronts lay in ruins, and shattered glass carpeted the streets. Authorities reported over 50,000 trees destroyed and dozens of highways impassable. Power lines dangled precariously and drainage systems failed, leaving entire neighborhoods submerged. For a city already grappling with economic decline, the storm was a crushing blow, exposing the government's failure to bolster infrastructure or support struggling communities. Zhuhai's struggle against the deluge. As Regaza carved its path westward, Zhuhai bore the storm's full wrath. By mid-morning on September 24, wind speeds reached a staggering 59 meters per second, shattering records for South China's coast. A red alert was issued as storm surges pushed tides over 2 meters above normal, flooding streets and engulfing vehicles. Low-lying areas became lakes, with ground-floor apartments inundated and families scrambling to higher floors, watching helplessly as their possessions floated away. Social media captured the chaos. One video showed seawater breaching barriers like a tidal wave, while another revealed underground parking garages submerged, with only car roofs visible. High-rise residents reported buildings swaying ominously, some comparing the sensation to a ship in a storm. The walls creaked and the balcony doors rattled like they'd fly off, said a Zhuhai resident on the 20th floor. Elevators malfunctioned, their doors jamming under the pressure of the winds, a phenomenon that left many stunned. In Jinwan district, floodwaters rose up to 5 meters, turning roads into canals and sweeping away everything in their path. Zhuhai Airport grounded all flights, and coastal parks vanished under the deluge. For the first time in decades, authorities ordered mass evacuations of shoreline high-rises, converting schools and sports centers into makeshift shelters. Yet, the government's response was widely criticized as sluggish and inadequate. Many residents, particularly the poor and elderly, were left stranded, with relief efforts hampered by bureaucratic delays and insufficient resources. "Where is the government when we need them?" one evacuee posted online, echoing widespread frustration. Human toll and heartbreak. The storm's impact went beyond physical destruction, leaving deep emotional scars. Social media platforms were flooded with desperate pleas for help. "The waves are smashing our windows," one woman cried in a video, her voice barely audible over the howling winds. Others shared images of taped-up windows, a futile attempt to hold back the storm's fury. In rural Yangjiang, farmers faced catastrophic losses. Livestock shelters collapsed, killing thousands of animals, including young chicks that were the backbone of many families' incomes. "My entire livelihood is gone," wept a farmer, surrounded by the wreckage of his poultry farm. Banana fields spanning hundreds of acres were flattened, and ancient agarwood trees valued at thousands of yuan per gram were reduced to splinters. The financial toll reached millions overnight, pushing already impoverished rural communities deeper into despair. Urban areas fared no better. In Shenzhen, where Regaza's outer bands struck, residents stacked sandbags and taped windows in a frantic bid to protect skyscrapers. Airlines wrapped planes in protective tarps, but over 3,000 flights across the Greater Bay Area were canceled, stranding millions. Public transport ground to a halt, leaving commuters trapped. The elderly, often living alone, felt the brunt of isolation. "When the power went out and the doors shook, I thought I'd never make it through," said a 60-year-old Yangjiang resident. The government's failure to address poverty and unemployment exacerbated the crisis. Many of those hardest hit were low-income workers and migrant laborers, already struggling in an economy where jobs are scarce and wages stagnant. Official unemployment figures claim a modest 5%, but independent estimates suggest rates as high as 12%. With youth unemployment nearing 20%, the storm left these vulnerable groups with no safety net, as government aid was slow to arrive and often misdirected to showcase projects rather than genuine relief. "They build shiny towers but leave us to drown," one resident lamented on social media. Hong Kong's battle with the elements. On September 24, Hong Kong faced Regaza's wrath as the observatory raised its highest alert, Signal No. 10. Winds exceeding 120 kilometers per hour uprooted hundreds of trees and flooded low-lying areas. Over 90 injuries were reported, caused by flying debris, collapsing structures, and wind accidents. In southern districts, 3-meter waves overwhelmed drainage systems, sending geysers of seawater into the streets. The Fullerton Ocean Park Hotel was inundated when its glass doors shattered, flooding the lobby as guests scrambled for safety. Schools closed, Disneyland shut down, and even horse racing, a Hong Kong staple, was cancelled. Supermarkets were stripped bare as residents stockpiled supplies while workers raced to secure buildings with makeshift barriers. The psychological impact was profound. Residents in towering skyscrapers described a nauseating swaying sensation, with some buildings shifting nearly 2 meters at their peaks, within legal limits but terrifying nonetheless. "It felt like the whole city was rocking like a boat," said a student living on the 50th floor. The government's response, however, drew sharp criticism. Emergency shelters were overcrowded and aid distribution was chaotic, leaving many low-income families without support. "The authorities care more about protecting businesses than helping the poor," one resident complained, highlighting the growing wealth gap and neglect of vulnerable communities. Macau's submerged streets. In Macau, Regaza turned streets into torrents. The inner harbor saw water levels rise by 2.5 meters, submerging roads and sweeping fish onto sidewalks. Locals grimly dubbed the flooded areas instant fish markets, but the situation was dire. Cars floated aimlessly, and knee-deep waters forced residents to wade through with belongings held overhead. All tourist sites closed, Macau International Airport halted flights, and ferry services stopped. Even historic sites like St. Francis Xavier Church Station were swamped with a meter of water. Despite warning, some residents risked their lives to collect stranded marine life, ignoring the dangerous currents. The government's disaster preparedness was widely criticized, with inadequate flood defenses and slow response times leaving communities to fend for themselves. For Macau's working-class residents, already hit hard by economic downturns and job losses in the tourism sector, the storm deepened their plight. "We're left with nothing and the government does nothing," one shopkeeper said bitterly. A broader crisis and government failures. By September 25, Guangdong authorities reported over 2.2 million people evacuated, with thousands of flights, trains, and ferries cancelled. Power outages crippled entire regions and repairs were delayed by debris-choked roads. Agricultural losses were staggering, with vast swathes of farmland destroyed, further threatening food security for impoverished communities. The government's response drew widespread condemnation. Relief efforts were underfunded and poorly coordinated, with supplies often failing to reach those most in need. Critics pointed to systemic issues, a focus on propaganda-driven infrastructure projects over practical disaster preparedness, and a refusal to address the root causes of poverty and unemployment. Migrant workers, who make up a significant portion of the region's labor force, were left particularly vulnerable, with no access to social safety nets or job opportunities in the storm's aftermath. "The government builds skyscrapers while we starve," one worker posted online, reflecting a growing sentiment of abandonment. Worse still, meteorologists warned of another tropical system forming in the northwest Pacific, potentially targeting the Philippines before looping back toward South China. For residents already battered by regaza, the prospect of another storm was a devastating blow. The government's failure to invest in resilient infrastructure or support its most vulnerable citizens left millions facing an uncertain future, with poverty and unemployment casting a long shadow over the region's recovery.